Welcome everyone to the Voice of the Terminus show. I'm joined by Lex. Say hello, Lex.
Hello.
We got Josh with us, all the way from France. Say hello.
Vive la France. Hello.
And we have
I'm
Shy.
so sorry.
And we have Shy with us in the background to answer all the questions towards the end of the show. Say hello, Shy.
Hello, hello.
And today's topic is we're going to be theory crafting again on Archetype and subclasses for the Direlord. And before we get into all of that, we just want to quickly bring up a disclaimer. These shows are just basically there to obviously entertain you guys, but also to actually look at the archetypes and subclasses and look at possible ways to revolutionize, modernize the way it's done. We're not necessarily saying this is what we want for Pantheon, this is how it should be for Pantheon, and we're also trying to look at ways to accommodate everybody's playstyle to some point. So, you know, we're not going to say that this is how we're gonna, or what we expect to see in Pantheon, but it's just some theory craft. So anyway, let's go and kick it off with the Direlord. And before we get into it all the juicy stuff that we've been prepping for, I'm going to go and read off Pantheon's description. Legends speak of Direlords capable of mastering the crippling power of fear, with some able to manipulate the essence of the living things, even with their blood, their very blood. So that's basically the description we have on the Direlord. Now, Lex, you're going to be playing a Direlord, or you want to play a Direlord. So, what do you think? Obviously, with the description in the back, your head, how do you picture your ideal Direlord for Pantheon?
Well, we all know that we're probably going to see a very closely related version of the Shadow Knight, at least in spirit, not necessarily in gameplay. What I kind of expect to see out of the Direlord is an aggressive tank style that requires perhaps debuffs, dots, life taps, things of that nature, where you're taking from your enemy to benefit yourself. And because, you know, you would see a paladin where they would cast a spell and it strictly benefits themselves. They don't believe in taking away really from people. But with the Direlord, obviously, that's the exact opposite.
Okay. Yeah. So we have some notes put down, and we're gonna look at this. So looking at the Direlord, where do you see his main function?
Personally, this is mostly because of my own playstyle. Tanking all the way, baby.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I see him tanking quite selfishly. If he can benefit himself, he will, at the expense of the enemy, and even sometimes to his from the group itself. But yeah, definitely to win at all costs, to make sure the enemy gets ground into the dust.
Yeah. So for me, you know, that's the great thing about the Direlord, the Paladin themselves. You know, they're seen as hybrid tanks. So and I always like that, that aspect of the tank, especially, you know, in EverQuest 2, I had both. I had a Paladin and a Shadow Knight, and I loved them because they were so versatile. They could be used in many areas, not just as a tank, but as a DPS tank, a utility tank, and so forth. And I think those also fit into it. But going back to the tanking, where do you see it? If you look at, so you're talking about being a main tank or something like that, basically. Where would you see the bonuses compared to a Paladin or a Warrior, the other two respective classes for Pantheon? Where do you see the Direlord's bonuses going when it comes to tanking? What would they initially have?
Well, to be honest, I would like to see personally, the Direlords do. Well, I want all the tanks to specialize in their own field, basically, to start that off. But I would really enjoy seeing a Direlord be a little more multi-target tanking. Maybe some AEs, maybe some aggressive style auras. Not so much utility for the group's benefit, like you would probably get out of a paladin, and not so much of just straight up head on, like you would see from a warrior. I want my Direlord to have a certain amount of skill in terms of my play style. To clarify that, meaning if I'm a heavy dot user, because that's just my personality for when I play this character, then I want my dots to be able to be used in a certain way that could potentially enhance their use. You know, there's a smart way to do it, and then there's a not so smart way. Giving options that would possibly branch off. Like, I'm just going to use the phrase combo system simply because it's easiest. But you would start off with, you'd have a starter dot. Then it would unlock the ability to use two more that would build upon it. And kind of example, where one might be a little stronger single target, the other might make it spread to the rest of the mobs around it, kind of thing. So whenever I get into an encounter, it's not just, you know, smash my AEs and go. I still have to think about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I have to be smart about my choices, because I don't have the straight up mitigation or toughness of a warrior, and I don't have, say, the heals or the utility of a paladin. So my skill or spell selection is going to come down to situation and what I need at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, for me as well, it's the mob must be probably it would be ideally halfway down in its health before it actually reached the Direlord, because of all the dots and indirect stuff that is happening to it. Ultimately, it's weakened to such a state that it'll be easy just to be picked off after that point.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of the Direlord, being able to weaken and negate the mob before it even reaches it on a toe-to-toe basis.
So you've basically broke it down, added some notes towards the Direlord. I'm going to read off of this, Lex, and we can go into this a bit as well.
They're rough notes. So.
Yeah. So the Direlord is a fear-based hybrid melee tank. All subclass specialization should follow a common name scheme. So you basically broke it down into the stances. I'll call these stances. You got your tanking stance, your dread guard, which you would call it, something like that. Which would, you know, sword and board, threat bonus to offensive spells, improve HP leeches, improve combat innate benefit. I couldn't agree more. To some point. Right. I think that's where I see the Direlord in the main tanking stance having his benefits, an extra threat bonus to offensive spells, an improved HP to leeches, improved combat innates as well that benefit him.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say is, because I see it coming up in chat, is that we're not talking about stance dancing. We're just using that as a term to define the different roles of this class.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we're not. I'm the first person to be like, no stance dancing. No, thank you.
No,
I hated that.
I agree.
With my Dreadguard, I guess is what I call it, that specialization, which would focus more on tanking. While I did kind of have the note of sword and board there, that would kind of be your typical go-to. It kind of makes sense, you know, because it's a little more defensive. However, I'm not saying that I want that to be the only option, because I really don't. I love aggressive tanks. I would love nothing more than a Direlord to have dual wield as a tank, have high parry. You know, I love that idea. Oh, wading in two swords.
Basically, you could go in there, and this kind of cuts into some of the functions. that we had in our previous show that Josh brought up as well, that kind of connect here. You know, I could see, like, if you have sword and shield, you might not have you know, your tanking subclass or whatever you want to put yourself in might not have the higher AoE effects available to him. But
Right.
but if he's got two swords, he's dual wielding swords. That's where he might have that AoE effect towards him, where he has an extra AoE damage. So
Right.
he tanks by having a high AoE. The more AoE he puts out there, the more aggro he gets. The more he stands firm. The more his HP leech and stuff like that could, you know, possibly work and all that good stuff. So that's how I kind of see where we can branch off of there is using and utilizing the use of the weapons as well differently, giving you a different approach to how you're going to be that tanking Direlord. So you've got a dual wielding Direlord, a sword and shield, a two-handed Direlord. Why not?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and even though it's like I'm going to stick with the idea of the Direlord being a multi-target or AE tank, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have single-target options. It just means they should be limited. Whereas, say, a warrior, to me, the warrior is just the epitome of tanking. I have no illusions that a warrior should be like the freaking bee's knees of the tank world. I've got no issue with that at all. But I really want there to be a connection with all the tanks so that it's not the paladins versus the warriors versus the dire lords when it comes down to the tanking community. I want there to be common ground. Like the warrior would be like the dead center. He go either way, defensive or offensive. You know, very flexible. The paladin just, to me, screams defensive. So they would obviously, it would be much more beneficial for them. And maybe they have skills that would possibly even enhance the sword and board mentality. Whereas while the Dire Lord could put on a sword and board, they embody the more offensive nature of tanking. So I know the two-hander is usually the stereotypical weapon or offensive weapon for the knights or hybrid tanks. I would rather see that go to a paladin, and then the Dire Lords get a little bit of a change around so that they're not just their cousin, and they get to dual wield. It's a small change, a small little bit of flavor. Visually, it comes off to me more aggressive, which would fit.
I'd like to see the Dire Lords certain chains, using chains as a weapon.
That'd be cool too. Even if there's like spectral chains or something.
A malice.
Yeah.
You know, ball and chain. That's how I picture the Dire Lord. Instead
Or
of
a
him coming with a sword at you and giving you a nice little slice, he'll mash you in.
Exactly.
Period. He's about chaos. He's about havoc. He's about causing you pain.
Yeah.
You know,
I could even see a Dire Lord tanking or being a DPS having the ability to like almost fixate on a specific target, which could add benefits. It could reduce their damage that's coming to you, or it could increase the damage that they take from you, or reduce their resistance, whatever. It could do a bunch of things, but it's one of those things where it kind of links you with your target. And maybe it's something like, 10 seconds, you can't you can't target anybody else unless this guy dies. Because you're so fixated on wanting this target to die that you're willing to put yourself in a potentially bad situation, not being able to retarget something else for 10 seconds for the benefit of what you would get. It's one of those risks versus rewards abilities that I absolutely adore, especially as an offensive tank.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right what you said earlier on about, the warrior is going to be ultimately
the main tanking
the main tank.
option.
He's going to be the main tanking option.
The standard.
But it should be an option. It should always be an option. Why shouldn't a Dire Lord or a Paladin be able to, take on that role if necessary, or if it has to be,
Right.
Because they're talking about challenge as well. So they want to bring challenge back and the socializing. So, in all fairness, the Direlord and the Paladin should be sufficient enough to tank as well in any given group. Obviously,
right.
It's not going to be as easy for them. It's going to be a challenge for the healers as well to keep up with the Direlord and the Paladin, where it might be a bit easier for them with the warrior and stuff like that. But
in my mind, when I think Pantheon, and I know I could be alone in this completely, especially in the tanking community. To me, the warrior seems like the very, very good place to start if you're new, right? The hybrid tanks screamed more flexibility and more options to your gameplay, which should have, in the past, translated into requiring more skill.
Yeah.
But it actually did the opposite, especially like in EverQuest.
But you're absolutely right. This was the same with EverQuest too. The Guardian was your tank, your go-to guy at the highest mitigation. It was a pretty dull class to play because it was pretty straightforward, but it was the go-to tank. Where you take a Paladin or the Berserker even or the Shadow Knight, they were so versatile in how you played them. Defensive, offensive, utility. They could do it all. And they all played differently, but the Guardian was kind of fixated on that one role. You're the tank. Right. You're going to be the tank in the raid, in the group, in the dungeon for all this hard stuff. But the other ones, they were, more flexible. And that's where I see the change coming to Pantheon as well, where they kind of balance this one out. The way I see just to kind of deviate here real quick towards the warrior. The way I see the warrior working on this one is weapon-wise. That's where he gets his versatile aspect to it. He can use any weapon. Be it a chain of malice, be it a sword, a spear, a two-handed weapon, a dagger.
He can be a master of any weapon.
Yeah. He can be a master of any weapon or a master of all weapons if he wanted to. But we'll get into that at a different show.
Speaking of weapons, if I'm not saying it would ever happen because, and all right, there's no reason for this to ever happen. But if VR were to come out to the tanking community and say, Direlords, would you prefer to give up sword and board, your sword and your shield, for the ability to dual wield? So that would limit you to two-handed dual wielding. That's very broad, but obviously not getting into the weapon types. Personally, I'd be like, oh yes, absolutely, no problem at all. I know a couple of hybrid tanks from my past that would have issue with it because to them, any kind of tanking screams get a shield.
Yeah, I'm one of them, Lex. I always had. I never played my SK in EverQuest 2 two-handed. Never did. I always had that that tower shield and that sword, and that's just my nature. How I played that class, and it just looked badass having that tower shield with the skulls and the bones on it. It just added to it.
to me, a shield screams defense.
Yeah,
obviously. You can't, in the real world, you can use a shield to attack because it's still a big piece of stuff on your arm that you can hit somebody with. But because it screams defense, I don't see it as an offensive weapon. So I want the Direlord to look aggressive. I want him to feel aggressive. I want him to be the guy that's like, caution to the wind, jump in the fray, and just start cutting suckers up, And a shield to me doesn't say that.
No.
But quickly touching on this though, with taking that away, sword and shield, and given the possibility to two-hand and have dual wielding. What other possible weaponry could you see though? What kind of dual wield weapons and what kind of two-handed weapons would you guys see a Direlord being able to use? For me personally, a Direlord would. I couldn't see he could use he would understand the basics of an axe type weapon, but I don't see him, for instance, using an axed weapon.
What about Bardishas? What are they called? Halbards and like what a cavalier. I don't know what they're called, but any lengthy type weapon as well.
Yeah, the Javeliers.
Yeah, exactly. Just something to keep the mob at bay, type of thing.
I can see
that could be.
Yeah, I could see them using something like that, being witty in those kind of weapons. Definitely, your typical broadsword, big evil, mash it up. Chain of Malice, like we already mentioned. I can't see him using dual wielding Chains of Malice. It just doesn't feel right to me. Doesn't have that evil look to it.
He could also be having maybe a flail, and then the other arm he could have like a sensor, evil sensor type of thing that he uses as a focus. Well, on the other hand,
Skice as well. What people are saying in chat.
Yeah, a scythe.
Yeah, I could see that happen.
Right. To me, a Direlord screams anything that's going to cut you or squish you.
Yeah.
I can't see them using piercing weapons because, from a Direlord perspective, and trying to get a little more into character kind of thing, I wouldn't use a piercing weapon. Why? Because it doesn't make as big of a mess. It doesn't intimidate my enemies. Whereas if I use a big jagged axe and I cut a guy in half, people are going to look at him and be like, bye,
Yeah.
Whereas, so to me, piercing never really made any sense, even if it was a two-hander. You could make the argument that pitchforks do look kind of evil, and I agree they do, but it doesn't have the desired effect on your enemy.
Yeah.
And I could see the Direlord going for every psychological effect that would demoralize his enemy, because that's what he counts on.
Exactly, something that brings great pain.
Yeah,
like a lance, for instance, but the top of the lance has got like a three sack on it or something.
Yeah,
like
barb
that.
or something.
Just when he spices you up, you got that. Yeah. Your guts have torn apart.
Right. I mean, yeah, it makes sense because in a more natural setting, a weapon's a weapon. But in a game, I even when I played EverQuest, I could get what was it, like a primal Velium lance, which is basically a two-hand piercer. I never used it on my Shadow Knight because I never really felt it was a very intimidating weapon.
And it's the same with the swords though as well. It wouldn't be your typical basic sword. That's long, pointy at the end. It would have
rapier. It wouldn't be a rapier.
It would be ragged. It would have like little indents in it. It would be thicker at the top of the end of the sword and stuff like that. It would just something that would rip you open. It's still seen as a sword, but it's just.
Take a long sword that's got some really jagged look. It looks like you just kind of rip teeth into the thing, Exactly. It's like it's intimidating to look at because if you're the person that's getting on the receiving end of that, you're gonna be like, that's gonna hurt,
Yeah.
And it would do massive damage to flesh. I know armor. And we're not gonna get into that.
I could even see a sword like the sword's normally like this, but the Direlord sword would also have, this as well going on it as well at the top. It would be something like this, going out in all directions, kind of thing as well. So instead of being, two-dimensional, the sword would be four-dimensional kind of thing.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying that we should have cosmetics linked to your class, but I mean, I can see people, especially role players. I'm not much of a role player, although there are times where I'd really like to be. But I am a sucker for really good cosmetics. Yeah, and same. I can see myself giving up a sword that is technically and say it's a saber, just a slightly curved blade to it, nice and clean looking. I can see myself giving that up for something that's a little bit weaker, but looks much, much cooler because it fits the Direlord as being intimidating. It's just, I don't really know what it is. I don't know why I do it. It's just, it fits to me and it helps me get in the game.
The thing is with the cosmetics, though, at the end of the day, the cosmetics help acquire that uniqueness as well, though. That's what every MMO should be one of their main desires, is to bring that uniqueness to their game. And for a lot of people, cosmetics might not mean much, but they can actually go a long, long way for the longevity of a game. The more cosmetics you put in there, the more time you actually put towards this, and the thought behind how somebody could look and how something could feel, cosmetic-wise, will go a long, long way in the long run.
Oh yeah. Yeah, if I'm immersed in my character and I feel connected to him visually and I'm into what this character is supposed to represent, I could be running the same dungeon a few times every day. It's going to take me much longer to get sick of it because I'm enjoying my character first.
Yeah. And
then experiencing the dungeon second. But speaking about weapons and the whole look to them and how they should be intimidating, especially from a Direlord's perspective, I think the same can be said about their abilities. The abilities should sound nasty and just really painful. Yeah. It's like, oh, rend. Okay, I get it. You rend your opponent. It's like, what sounds worse, rend or gut slice?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna go for gut slice.
Yep. And we'll talk a bit about that as well in a bit. Josh, you want to add anything to the weaponry?
No, I think exactly what you guys have said is right. The cutting, the slicing, the maximum carnage is what a Direlord is all about, in my mind as well.
So, you want to go into more detail about some of the abilities, tanking wise, Lex, or do we want to look at the?
I can touch on them real briefly, because I mean, if there were modifiers based upon your specialization to existing abilities that would be shared amongst all specializations for a Direlord, the kind of modifications I would expect to see are obviously threat enhancements, because you're a tank. Threat is a very big deal. And it could just be something to where it's like, again, I'm going to use the combo system. You do your starter dot, and then you do a dot that does a debuff that requires it to be dotted ahead of time. Well, now it adds threat because you're a tank. If you were a DPS, you don't want that. If you're a DPS, you're just like, no threat, thank you. So that one's pretty obvious.
I just had a quick light bulb moment about one of the abilities or special abilities that the tanking Direlord could possibly have, towards the threat as well. So let's say you're engaging an encounter, and then you engage the next, the more you kind of engage, the bigger your threat gets to a certain point where you can kind of like where I envision this is like you have to have a certain amount of threat gathered by getting your ass kicked by NPCs, obviously. But once you've reached that threshold, you can kind of like, kick off a special ability that links towards fear, that causes like, a mental, they just go completely crazy, mental, full of fear, and start doing all kinds of different things.
There's I mean, it's a great thought. There is some stuff that would have to be worked out, but I love it for the Direlord because that would promote an aggressive gameplay. So, like, the longer you're out of combat, the stacking debuff that is caused by every single ability, gives you one stack or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe it increases your damage output or your damage intake or whatever. And the longer you're out, say every 2 seconds or every second, you lose a stack of it, or one off the stack. I like that because like I said, it promotes an aggressive style of gameplay. Your people are resting, you're sitting there going, I gotta kill these guys. I want to kill it because, oh my god, I have to kill him. And it fits the Direlord.
And it makes you as well, when you're going through a zone or a dungeon or whatever, where you have like single encounter here and there, that adds to the utility of your tank, of your Direlord, because he's still in a special niche of the tanking area, same as a paladin towards the warrior. So you still want to be able to utilize the Direlord to its fullest, because to touch on spells briefly in general, the thing that's really bugged me now for the last 10-15 years with MMOs in general is you get hundreds and hundreds of spells thrown at you. Half of them are pointless or are used for this the main game. Then they're not used anymore in the next expansion, or they get overridden by something new from a different from the next expansion. I'd rather have lesser spells at my disposal that are something that I can use throughout the game, regardless if I'm level 1 or level 110 or level 200.
Right. Yeah.
Those spells should still count for something, or a way to maybe modify or upgrade a spell that's maybe obsolete. Instead of giving me a new spell, let me actually try and modify a spell.
Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest. One of the biggest reasons that I did not like EverQuest 2 is because of that. I have more abilities than hit points, basically. You know, it's like,
Yes.
And honestly, you only ever needed 5, maybe 7.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't need to have 7 hotbars up, but you had so many, and some of them were worded in such a way that they sounded like they were amazing, but they really weren't. So they were useless, and they just sat there.
That's kind of the great thing that VR, are looking at doing. They mentioned in the stream with Jim Lee that you can have that one hotbar and you have 12 abilities. That doesn't mean necessarily that you're only going to have 12 spells. You can still have 24, 36, 48 different spells, but you'll only be able to use 12 at any given time. And I'm perfectly fine with that as long as each spell that they put into my spell book for whatever class it is carries weight with it, has a value with it throughout the longevity of the game. Doesn't matter what zone I'm going to be in, what level I am, as long as those spells have some kind of function. And not necessarily, they don't have to all be something that I can use every single time. Obviously there's going to be some spells that are going to be situational, that are going to have maybe the best effect on named encounters or on raid encounters or something like that. When you look at the buffs, for instance, not every buff has to be something that I can utilize or use whenever I want. Some of them are going to have to be situational, or are going to be situational, and so forth. And that's where I think they're heading in the right direction with that thought. And I hope that reflects as well to this discussion on the archetype and subclassing. If we look at it from that perspective. Yeah.
I mean, choice is a spice of life, but eventually everything gets too spicy. You need a break. I feel better going into a situation where I've very carefully chosen my skill set to fit the situation, because it also gives you a little bit of dread in the back of your mind, like maybe you didn't prepare for something.
Yeah.
Oh God, what are you gonna do?
What if?
Yes, it's the what if that'll gnaw at your heels while going through a dungeon. Whereas if, like in EverQuest 2, if the feces hits the fan, you can just be like, smash your keyboard and be like, I'm doing the right thing.
Anything to add to the spells, Josh, Lex?
Just for tanking, it's just a lot of common sense stuff. If you have something that takes hit points from the opponent and gives it to you for tanking, maybe you get a bonus to how much you get healed. If you have combat innates like EverQuest had the Vampiric Embrace that made your melee attacks randomly do a small life tap, maybe those trigger more often when you're a tank. Things like that. You know, it's all pretty easy.
Yeah, for me, I think the Direlord should be, the spells that it gets should basically stack onto one another to enhance its abilities ultimately. Make it an intelligent tank rather than just a normal smashy tank type of thing. So that for me is key.
The Direlord's always been, you know, in my envision of what the Direlord is. A lot of people saw it as hack and smash, cause pain and damage, but for me, it comes with a high intelligence to actually do that. A Direlord for me is a very smart tank. You know, he might cause havoc and rely on pain and chaos and everything, but it takes a certain amount of intelligence to actually master that and use it to your ability. So you know, I want the Direlord to feel really smart when you're playing it as well, not just something you click wildly on this spell and then that spell. You actually have to think about what to cast, when to cast, in what kind of order, and figure that out as you go. So, question for you guys towards Archetype and Subclass: if this were something in Pantheon, would you like to be able to, or do you think the Direlord is your typical, you have your Direlord and then at a certain point in time you advance to a higher class, or you know, a subclass of sorts, or is this or would you like to see the possibility, or do you think there's room for the possibility to stay as a Direlord and then and or choose to subclass into a different direction? Would the Direlord be more or would it be versatile enough to have that option?
Personally, with specializations or class evolution in general, in a lot of games in the past, they've done it in such a just a slap together manner that it's really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Certainly it has in mine. I think that specialization should always be optional. Because if you want to be a very, very, very flexible Direlord in the scope of what a Direlord can do, then you shouldn't have to specialize. But it's like, we'll say for me, I tank. It's what I do, you know. So it doesn't make sense for me to be versatile. It doesn't make sense for me to be a DPS. But it makes perfect sense for me to be the tank specialization.
Josh?
I would hesitate to keep it as an archetype, to be quite honest. I think versatility is key in the Direlord, so it would be great for them to go along the different ways to see different types of play styles going into the level 50s in my mind. So yeah, I wouldn't continue past a certain point, to be honest. That's my thinking.
So anyway, let's go and get into do you want to quickly briefly fly over the damage and utility decks that we brought up?
For my note,
jump into the
real good stuff.
Yeah.
For my notes, they're all pretty general stuff. I'm pretty sure everybody out there sees where I'm going with a lot of the stuff. Like, and it was very basic. Like, a damage spec would have improved dot damage or direct damage spells. They're combat nates, like your combat Vampiric Embrace Life Tap, for example, from EverQuest 1, would do more damage but still heal you the same. For a utility style, you could do something where their buffs and their debuffs, the only one that comes to mind right now is Shadow Vortex from EverQuest, where it stole some armor class from the target and gave it to you. That would be obviously enhanced. You could even do stuff to where maybe those benefit the group now. Obviously benefit you more. That's the key. Because Direlords are selfish. It would benefit you. Say it would give me 10 armor class, but it would give the group 3 or 4. Yeah, I mean it's all pretty standard, to be honest.
Mm. Okay, cool. Before we go into the really cool stuff, Shai, do you already have any questions or thoughts, ideas?
I've got a few questions that people have asked. Not very many, though.
Oh, bring them up then. We'll quickly go through.
Bring it on!
Alrighty then. From, of course, Dayhawk. Perhaps Direlords could have a single target dot and a second ability that could turn the dot into an AoE, so he can dot a target. And if he needs to, he can spread that to nearby targets. Then he would use like a second ability to change the single target into a group target.
That's almost like having single focus.
Well, it's you start off as single, but your strength is in group, because while it starts off with a single, this again comes into skill. Because say you pull 3, well, you're going to try and want to get these off in the proper order as fast as you can, right? Because you need to get that group A, but you have to build it up. And so it would be you dot the 1, he's on you now. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, maybe it's something where it's like called Contagion, as an example, and it spreads it to those around it. Now those 2 are dotted as well, and they're on you. But, obviously, you would use your target as a focal point for the AE, and then you would basically modify as needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
I could see that. Yeah. Go on, Josh.
I was just going to say, I like it. I like the fact that you need to be skilled enough to be able to make sure that you're dotting each one of them over a length of time, especially in the VR fights where the mobs take a while to drop.
And it also adds to the usefulness of a spell like that. While it is single target, maybe, but it can kind of like a virus spread over to multiple targets as well, so it brings that usefulness to it. It's kind of like why I mentioned single focus. It's kind of like something what EQ did, but the opposite way. For those classes out there that had a high AE damage, they could cast single focus and therefore not cause havoc on everything, basically. So it's that's why I brought up single focus earlier on, because it kind of reminded me in that aspect a bit. But I definitely can see that, and that brings that usefulness, that versatile aspect to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Next one, Sean.
So the second question is from Christo US82. They want to know about allowing a Direlord to have hit shield mechanics as a tank archetype. Would be really kind of neat. What are your thoughts on that?
It would be, but I feel that fits a paladin much more, because it's a very defensive ability where you put in like damage shields and stuff on yourself, or perhaps on others, whatever. To me, it feels very defensive. So I would say that would be more of a paladin's realm. With the Direlord, it'd be more of, I'm going to hurt them to negate what they did to me. So that's where your life tabs, your leeches, and et cetera, would fit a little better in my opinion.
Yeah. I've got nothing to add.
Yeah, same.
Everyone's agreeing with me.
And apparently, you guys, we need to make sure we clip this for Dayhawk, because he's just gobsmacked by the thought that somebody's actually agreeing with him for once.
Yes. Okay.
He's just completely shocked by the fact that Lexer agreed with him.
I'm going to make this 100% clear on air right now. I give paladins a hard time because in the past paladins have been the, oh look, I'm winning class. So I have very little respect for them and most of the players. As much of a hard time as I give Day, I respect him as a player, as a part of the community, and he does come up with really great ideas, despite the fact that he's a paladin.
Well, everybody has their bad points, I suppose. So we have the last question in my roster anyway, again from Christo US82, asking, what about combat skill swapping for tanks? If there's a limited number of skills on the bar, should you be able to swap in and out on the fly?
No.
No, unless you basically are out of a fight and you can actually focus on just making sure you can change to a different type of ability. I see that as being an option. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. I don't think in combat you should be allowed because that takes away preparation. Granted, there is skill involved in like hot swapping abilities. I've done it in a few games and it's harder than people think. But I really want to get away from this changing things in combat because that removes any preparation that's required, any forethought. That removes any feeling of dread or danger.
I can see that working in, you know, action combat games where it might be necessary to do something like that. But if we look at the way Pantheon is going to be, I think that would be more damaging to the game. Where you can just, you know, hey, I'm def stance, I'm off stance, I'm tank stance, I'm switching to this, I'm switching to that. For a tank, if something like that were to happen, the way I would see that only working is you would have to have like three people out of the group would have to basically chain route the encounters. You would have to have like maybe a certain time period where there's no damage going on the tank. So like 30 seconds or 45 seconds, a tank has to, you know, has no damage going towards him. Then he has a breather to maybe do something like that.
Right.
But that's like something like where I see a last resort coming.
Right. Reading chat, there was something how that was part of the multi-class area discussion.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, like, say, swapping from tanking to DPS,
no,
absolutely not.
No,
absolutely not.
No, definitely not.
It's that to me screams almost lack of faith in the players.
Yeah.
You know, you can't make it as a tank, so we're going to give you the ability to tank or DPS whenever you want.
For me, what I was getting at is basically your abilities. So you're that class. You can change your abilities, but that would also be 45 seconds. You take no damage as an example. Then you can maybe swap out an ability that will help you out in that situation. So you've taken maybe an additional taunt, but you want to switch that now out to something that buffs the group or whatever that you have at your disposal for your class. That's how I would kind of like to see that done as well. Not something where you can just go on the fly. I'm going to quickly sit down here, switch out the spell, turn around and carry on. No way.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we're in trouble. Our healer died. Hold on a second, guys. Keep it rooted. Go to heal. Now I'm the healer.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
It's always, that kind of stuff's always bugged me because it's like, granted, it's not the easiest thing to do, but you should have been prepared for that eventuality. If you thought this might happen, you have to try to prepare for the unforeseen. That's a part of the challenge.
And that's what's going to happen though when you engage this new world, Terminus. You know, you go in there. It's an MMO. We've all played them. We've all done it. But that's what we're looking for. That sense of adventure. That risk versus reward, the unexpected. When we go into this game and we get together with a group, we're going to sit down for 10, 15 minutes before we even set off on our adventure and say, right, guys, what are we going to be doing? Where are we going to be going? And then Josh, Lexa, Shy, myself, Dayhawk maybe, Catharsis or whatever, is going to look in their inventory, make sure they've got all the stuff that they need, the provisions and all this good stuff, resists and
Make sure our hair is
acclimation.
nice.
Yep, they're going to check that they've got their abilities ready for that particular zone, and that's what we're looking for. So, no on-the-fly hot swapping.
Oh, actually, Wiki Wacky Woo has an interesting question. Do you agree with race selection for the Direlord, and could there be dire ladies?
No.
I'd have to bring up the chart to see if anything really stuck out. Everybody out there knows me personally. There's only one Direlord.
Yeah, which
Scar.
we had the Scar, we had the Dark Mirror.
Mm-hmm.
We had, was there another one?
Well, humans can play anything, so.
Yeah, humans.
It's not
play
the
anything.
ogre, is it?
Did the ogre have?
Ogres maybe.
No, ogre had warrior, didn't he?
Yeah.
They didn't have Direlord.
I don't really.
I'm gonna have to go and find this tank chart, this class chart real quick. Let me go and bring it up. I want to have, because that's actually a good question, and we'll have a quick look at that.
But
I like the idea of dire ladies. I mean, it would really be nice, just from my opinion, is instead of having everything geared towards the masculine in titles and stuff, it would be nice to see like a dire mistress.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines, just for a feminine side of it.
Yeah. Like I would love to see just in general. Like, in EverQuest, when you hit like 51 and higher, you did the Who All or Who in the Zone, and you see the different class names like Cavalier or Revenant and stuff like that, the Troubadour or whatever. It would be very cool if, given that it made sense, that title would also be reflected in your gender. So instead of being a dire lord, if you're a female, you could be a dire lady.
Yeah,
you still get
if they did that, I would totally play it.
Yeah.
So we have the Dark Mirror, the Human, the Ogre, and the Scar. Those are the four that can play, and I think that fits.
I agree.
There's nothing where I'm
cool
saying no.
I don't really. I haven't really immersed myself in the other races that much because of how much I enjoy the Scar. I can see certain races fitting it more than others, obviously, because when I think of an ogre, I think warrior. Yeah. And that could be because of my EverQuest upbringing, to where an ogre warrior was just like, the best selection for min-maxing. It very much could be that. But being a militant race, militant screams warrior to me. Scar, they're all about just straight, unadulterated, unfiltered hatred for everything. That's Direlord. Yeah.
And just to answer this question about dire ladies, why not?
Yeah.
There has to fit somewhere.
If the Direlord were, say, gender locked, I think that I would be in the front row of that protest for sure. I'd see absolutely no reason. There has been a couple stories that I have read where the antagonist was a very dark, very foreboding female, and I got to tell you, those are some of the best novels I've ever read. They were the character was engaging, a little off the rocker. I mean, if the fact that it was a woman probably accounted for very little because the writing was so good. But when a lot of people think female, physically they tend to think less intimidating, right? Or less capable. But when you see something like an antagonist or even a protagonist that is female, that is a physical, we'll just say a physical specimen for...
I'd have it as the Direlord and the Dark Mistress.
There you go.
Something like that, yeah.
Oh, I would totally go for that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to... It can still be the same class, but it's just... classified different. There's nothing wrong with doing it like that. That adds that little cosmetic, that fluff, that uniqueness to it again. Something that we you don't see straight away off the bat, but it's in the back of your head. That keeps you kind of occupied and engaged in the game without you even knowing it. It messes with your subconscious. With
immersion, especially in a video game, it's not so much how can we draw them in. It's a case of how do we avoid them from being pushed out of the immersion. Yeah. Because people want to be immersed in these games. And they'll find the smallest things to connect to and really latch onto. But you become less immersed when the tiny things start poking at you.
Yeah.
And for me, it wouldn't matter. But like, say, for a female or someone who prefers to play a female character, being called a Direlord, it would be one of those things that pokes at you. It's like, this doesn't make sense. I'm not a lord, you know? And that big or small, depending on your personal scale, could ruin your immersion. It might not. But it's if it's something that bugs you on any scale at all, it's one more thing to push you away from the immersion. When technically all it is strictly fluff.
Yep. So, I guess Josh has nothing further to say to that. So, Josh, do you want to go and introduce us into
subclasses?
His much better and more detailed notes.
All right. So, I basically broke it down into the subclasses, and I came up with 5 subclasses. The first one being the Unholy Paladin, the Blood Knight, the Plague Cavalier, the Puppet Master, and the Crypt Keeper. That was the last one, yes. Anyway, so if I start off with the first one, the Unholy Paladin, I looked at what is the function of these subclasses, and they can be AoE destruction, direct or indirect damage, dot specialist, debuff specialist, close or ranged combat, or harmful magic. And then I tried to rank them basically by that. So I said Unholy Paladin could be AoE, direct or close. The Blood Knight could be a dot specialist, direct, close, harmful magic. The Plague Cavalier could be the dot direct debuff and a bit of healing. Puppet Master was a dot direct AoE and close, and the Crypt Keeper was a debuff close range, direct and indirect. And I'll come to these why I've chosen those. So if we look at I
was just going to quickly note, because we mentioned functions. We've done that now since we started this, and for those that have just connected to us, why we're looking at this from a function view is because we want to spice up how you would subclass. So instead of your typical AA tree where you're on a determined path where you have to put points into a certain skill tree, you would pick a function, for instance, maybe that would determine how your subclass could be played or how it would be engaged. So you could initially have a function that determines you and maybe something else, but we'll get into that at a later point. I wanted to quickly clarify that while we go into functions.
Cool.
And
so
sorry to interrupt.
Go
the only thing that I like, these are great. I love the names that you came up with them, like the Hex Knight. That just puts tingles down my spine. I love it. VR, there's a great little title for you right there. The only one that I ever even have a remote issue with is Puppet Master, because to me that screams enchanter.
Yeah.
And I know I'm just being a nitpicky little shit.
Yeah, we sat down before we hooked up with you, going over the document, and we were like, Puppet Master's name doesn't
exactly. Puppet Master doesn't really
but
fit,
we're getting
but it's the only thing I could think of at that point. I'm sure there's better names than that.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, let's start with the Unholy Paladin. So basically, I thought of the Unholy Paladin as being somebody that manipulates the auras of the Direlord, causing continual waves of death and decay to wash over the enemy. And I thought of the fear aura, the nausea aura, the disease, and the plague aura. Right. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the fear aura, it can cause a panic in enemies, reducing their ability to focus on the group, and reduces the ability to hit us. Now, what I've done is I've broken down the auras into strengths. So obviously, the more powerful you get, the more powerful these auras will become. Mm-hmm. So the disease aura, for instance, the second level of the fear aura, sorry, not disease, but fear aura, causes panic in enemies, reducing the ability to focus on a group to a greater degree. It reduces the ability to hit us as the group, and enemies have to do fear checks to stop them from freezing in fear for a few seconds. And this doesn't affect like your bosses or your leaders type of thing.
Right.
So as you can see, the fear starts increasing on the enemies, and they will now start freezing. And then the final level of the fear aura will cause panic in the enemies. It will cause them to do fear checks to freeze them, and will cause certain of them to go mad and start attacking their own kind, basically.
I really dig that, but for me, I would love to see the way the auras are done. Rather than have them be the stronger you get, the better this fear aura gets. Have that be an option, a choice that you might have to make for the ability. So you'll put it a hard choice. Do you take this one or do you take the other? Because they both have benefit, they both have merit, they both have a usefulness to themselves. So I definitely dig that, because that's one thing that I've always that's always bugged me, is with the Shadow Knight the fear, or when you get feared in a game, you just run off. Yeah, what about me just standing there or actually hitting my group?
Freeze in fear.
The tank turns around and starts beating the healer to death.
Because you don't want to go running off, and then he runs into the other mobs and causes them to come back at you. So
that kind of touches into the dispositions and behaviors.
Yeah, exactly.
Give that to the spells as well. Why not go that route and add dispositions and behaviors to the spells? So that could be.
Well, it's like how they're saying the one that got the phobia of fire. I would say what I think they called it, but I'd probably slaughter it and look like a fool. So I'll just settle for looking like a fool. You could do something where, if say this particular disposition has an issue with fear-based stuff, then he would be more susceptible to these kind of things. One thing I will say is I absolutely adore auras, especially as a hybrid tank, because mostly these hybrid tanks are classified as knights, and then knights make me think auras. Paladins get an aura in D&D. Why shouldn't their evil twin?
Exactly.
And I like the idea of that you went with these, because it's almost, instead of like saying it gets stronger when you level, why not have it where it gets stronger the longer they get in it, up to a point? Yeah. So if a mob's standing close to a Direlord, he's going to get this just a small tingling of dread, and then as they fight more and more, he's going to start getting like, oh, something's not right here. Oh God, what's going on? It's that psychological.
I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here.
And they get distracted. So now they get no, I'm not talking a massive a reduced chance to hit. I'm talking like maybe a few percentage, never double digits.
Maybe that could even link to what we mentioned earlier on. That special ability. So the more you're fighting, like we mentioned earlier on, the more aggro you gain, the more your fear or your aura effects are going to have. Right. So that could you could kind of link that towards that as well.
The way you've described the fear aura really screams tanking. It's an ability I would love to have as a tank.
Yeah.
It could be even the more powerful you get, the bigger the aura actually spreads out.
Right.
And
you can actually make the aura non-aggressive, so that if you're standing next to like a non-aggressive monster, it's not going to be like come at you, because it's a non-aggressive spell. It's just something that affects people in the area, which is how an aura should work. But what I would say, like reducing their a chance to flee. What, in my opinion, what I would do is I would say have it also affect casters, where the percent chance to hit is a percent chance to have your spell disrupted.
Yeah, exactly. Disrupt.
Because
of course,
when I hear like running in fear in a group setting like a dungeon, my first reaction is panic. Oh, for the love of God, snare that thing! We're gonna die.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because that adds to it, you know, having the fear do all kinds of different things, you know, and it could be different depending on your resistibility or the resistibility that the mob has, the situational gear that you have. You know, this is a way to actually go in and make spells do things that we never thought were possible, with the most easiest aspect, by just adding that behavior to a spell.
I just got a thought for a mechanic for like, if you were to do this aura, while the mob's in your aura, it gets, we'll say like every second it gets a stack up to 5. This stack gives you 1% chance to miss, 1% chance to be interrupted per stack. Some abilities require a certain amount of stacks. Maybe they consume some of those.
Yeah. I think who's it written there? Chris, is it? The last.
Christo US 82.
So he says a fear times 3 mob, it becomes a stun swap, and the fear times 5 mob can be hit with a death blow. So the times 5 could be 5 stacks on the mob, basically.
I love
something like that.
It's those small details that add to the immersion and the, you know, it's one of those things where you're playing the game and you're not even thinking about time, and you look at the clock and it's already 6 in the morning. It's light outside. You're like, holy shit! I got to be up and get ready for work in 20 minutes. Oh my god! But that adds just so much immersion and diversity to how we play the game.
Correct.
That might be something for a different show. A mechanic on how to advance spells as well. By taking the simple mechanic of behaviors. That for a later time. You heard it first on VOT.
Anyway, to continue with the Unholy Paladin. So the second aura, I thought it was a nausea aura, which causes vomiting in the enemies and reduces their strength. Ability to do damage is also reduced because of that. The second level of that aura would be reduces the strength and the stamina now. So the hit points are now lowered of the mob as well. And finally, the nausea causes the strength and stamina to be reduced. And I just said the hit points would be lowered even further over here. I didn't really have a third one for that. So that's the nausea.
I love this one too, because if say I'm the Direlord, you know, if I'm running a tank in a tank heavy group, maybe I'm the off tank, maybe whatever. This means that while, you know, this is a viable aura that I can still use for tanking, because it does reduce my opponent's abilities. So it's swappable with the fear one. It's just a matter of flavor now, what I prefer.
And
and if we have two Direlords, you can get them both.
Yeah, just think of that. But the thing is, as well, with the nausea one as well, I could see the usefulness of that already. You know, a encounter where you have maybe a healing mob that constantly heals somebody. Guess what? Boom. Nausea aura. You ain't healing anything because you're going to be vomiting and throwing up. Your endurance is going to be down. Your mana is going to be affected because you can't keep up because you're being sick all the time. So we can easily take down these encounters. It's a different.
We had a question from Christo US 82 again. wondering if these amazing skills would stack with the shaman-style debuffs.
I was in the middle of typing an answer to that. Because here's the thing. I know, you beat me to it. I gotta say, first off, Chris, great job with the questions. I'm loving them. In my mind, auras would be so minor that they not minor enough to where they wouldn't feel useful, but minor enough to where it's not major, like a major difference here. So stacking it with, say, a shaman debuff, really, what's the effectiveness you're increasing? You know, you might gain overall a 2% increase. It's not that big of a deal. It helps. It is better because teamwork.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And you can even link these auras to the mana stones.
Mm-hmm.
No, you have certain classes in your group that have these certain colors of mana stones that even, to a slight point, affect the usefulness or the effectiveness of the auras that you have in your group, from the shaman and from the Direlord, for instance. So you might have to have a shaman and a Direlord that have a blue and a white mana shard or whatever to enhance it, or you know,
exactly.
but only to minor points, like.
And just remember that you've still got magical items and things like that might even enhance these things even more. So these might seem minor now, but add 1 or 2 things to them and they become fairly powerful in the long run.
That adds a lot of room for gear specialization.
And and that's what makes the difference though for the Direlord and the Paladin against the warrior. Mm-hmm. Their usefulness comes from having auras. And that's what makes them special, because they can hold their own and hold the group with using these auras. It's about being a smart tank, using them correctly. That's where that's where, you know, what Lexa mentioned on where skill comes into play by these classes.
Yeah, while a Direlord may not have the statistical advantage, a skilled player can make up for that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you know, if you're doing sports, you know, if maybe you're playing football, you can't throw the ball very far, but you can run like a bat out of you know where. Obviously, there's something that you can do that makes you a valuable part of the team. You know, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, even if we look at a raid situation, the warrior statistically on paper could be a better tank. That does not mean that a Direlord or a Paladin can't perform the main tank function. But in the event that you have a warrior and a Direlord, both equally skilled, equally geared, it makes sense to put the warrior up front, but the Direlord is still useful. He's still playing a role.
Yep. So, Josh, do you want to carry on with the auras? And I promise, after I finish your sentence, me and Lex will shut up while you go through the auras, and then we'll get back into it. But one thing I just really quickly want to point out before we do that, most people have mentioned about, you know, interesting super in theory crafting. We're all about that. No worries for spamming chat. That's what we want. We want to engage with you guys in chat. Feel free to even hook up on our Discord and sit down with us and theory craft there. And for people out there, we are still looking for people to help us out in the back end, behind the scenes, behind the curtain, to help design these shows and get them prepared. So if anybody's interested in that, we've recently had Nekrios.
Is it Nekrios or Neceros?
Neceros, I think it was. Yeah. Either way, we're slaughtering names. That's what we do. He's recently joined us to help out, and we're still looking for other people, because the more there are helping us out, the better we can get these prepared and knocked out. And we got the show set up for the better part of the year. But yeah, feel free. So
we still need help to prepare, because we all have lives, and just I'll put it this way: I don't do much because I'm lazy, but Yarn spends hours just like working on all of this that you see.
Okay. Right, so let me just Continue with the disease aura. Causes boils and oozing sores to break out of the enemy and reduces their constitution by a bit, which effectively lowers their hit points. The disease aura is level 2, I guess. Bits of the enemy go into paralysis, reducing their constitution, and movement speed by a position. And then the third level of this would then boils and oozing sores break out. Bits of the enemy goes into paralysis, and the movement speed reduces by 2 positions. And could body parts drop off the enemy and disintegrate? I said, maybe.
Dude. You got whoa. Oozes and boils and body parts dropping off.
Of course.
Yeah! I love it.
Oh.
All right, the plague aura.
You've been watching The Walking Dead, haven't you?
Many things. Plague aura causes pestilence and tiny microbes to attack the enemy, reduces their chance to hit by 5%. Each 6 seconds has a 10% chance for the plague to reinforce itself on the mobs, doubling the effectiveness of the aura. The second one is just an increase of the hit chance. It lowers their chance to hit by 10%. Each 5 seconds has a 20% chance for the plague to reinforce on the mob. Any enemy takes damage from the pestilence per second as well now. And then the third one is a 15% chance to be reduced their chance to hit. Each 4 seconds has a 33% chance of the plague to reinforce itself on the mob, doubling the effectiveness of the aura.
Yeah.
Enemy take damage from the pestilence.
Yeah.
So those are 4 auras.
Yeah. These are just random pulling them out of the air numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just pulling them out the air. It's not.
So no one go crazy, please.
And these auras, obviously, as well. You know, there's room to add more.
Yeah, exactly.
So these are just some of the ideas that were brought up for this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it because we've got 4 auras. Was it 4 auras?
Yeah.
They're all uniquely valuable.
Yep.
Technically, you have a little bit of overlap, so one's similar to another. Like the fear reduces hit, so does the plague one. But it's up to you. Do you want like the spell interrupt as well from the fear, or do you want the damage from that? I mean, you have an aura to fit a situation, and it's up to you to determine which aura fits a situation better. And I freaking love it.
Yep.
Great. Right. So the next one I thought of. I changed the name of this next one, I think. Let's have a look.
It's called Hex Knight.
I called it a Hex Knight. Sorry, guys. All right. So instead of the Blood Knight, I called it the Hex Knight. The Hex Knights can curse and hex a mob, causing a variety of agonies to specific enemies. It includes like racking pain, transform, confuse, energy drain, and haunt. So for this, they will cast a hex on a specific enemy, and for instance, racking pain, which depending on the strength of it, can either be 10 seconds long, 20 seconds long, or 30 seconds long. Causes the enemy to either drop or fizzle a spell, drop weapons or fizzle spells during the curse, and can be cast every 20 seconds. The next one is transform. It transforms the enemy into a harmless ooze, and the ooze will try and slide away from the group. Confuse will cause the enemy to either stand around or attack a random person. Attacks will be slower due to the confusion. Then energy drain can cause an enemy to continue to lose energy and mana per second. So this is very important for against casters, or even if you're trying to do special attacks on the group. And then the final one is a haunt, which causes a mirror image to appear and attack of the mob, to attack either him or a random enemy, and depending on the strength of the spell, will be 50% health, 75 or 100% of the mob's power.
You could even take that haunt and add that to the aura list.
Yeah,
but you know,
exactly.
But you could still make it completely different though how it works. So it kind of like the way I see Haunt working as an aura, it's an interrupt. The better you're skilled at it, or the more concentration you have or control you have, basically, the more chance you have to interrupt on a frequent level with the aura, the encounter, because he keeps on, thinking he's seen a ghost or something, just kind of knocks him out of whack.
Yeah. Exactly. It's cast on the actual mobs themselves, Chris. Okay, the next one I said was.
while you're looking, it's a blood cavalier. You can still see though the difference between, you've got the unholy paladin, the hex knight. Alone there, you can see the difference of playstyle you're going to have.
Major difference.
There's a huge difference on how this subclass would be played.
Exactly. So the Blood Cavalier. The Blood Cavalier uses blood of the enemy to empower and mark his movement and weapons. This is all based on the harvesting of the enemy's blood. The upkeep is needed by the Blood Cavalier, and to keep on getting blood in to make sure that he keeps the levels of the blood up, to ensure that he can start putting these marks on the enemy. So he may start with a full bar of blood, but after one mark, the bar may be reduced to something like 40%. And so the more powerful this blood cavalier becomes, and the bigger his bar becomes of blood, he can maybe cast 2 marks now on the enemy, or 3 marks going forward down the line. So certain marks that you can put on the enemy from this could be things like mark of boiling blood. This will increase the movement speed of the grief for 30 minutes. The mark of steel. This increases the swing speed of the group for 30 minutes. So this would effectively increase the hits. The mark of blood life. The more damage the Blood Cavalier does and draws blood, transfers waves of healing to the group. So you'll get bits of healing coming back towards the group the more blood that is being spilled. The cleansing mark. Place a mark on the enemy, causes buffs to be removed every 6 seconds for 30 minutes, basically. So you put the mark on the ground or on a wall or something like that, and any mobs within that range, they'll be debuffed basically every 6 seconds. And then the mark of rot, which you can put it on the ground, which causes enemy weapons and armor to rot and weaken over the fight, causing a decrease in damage by the mob and a decrease in protection for the enemy.
So you can also see as well the different type of subclass this is. I see the Blood Cavalier as a utility.
Yeah,
Direlord. That's where he would categorize himself. So that's something like, it's something that's next to your cleric or next to your healer, helping out in the back,
kind of controlling the flow of the fight.
Yeah, basically.
Exactly. That's where the intelligence of these tanks. Then the next one is the Puppet Master, which is a bit dorkish.
Yeah, we have to think about this.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just to a lot of people, especially older MMOs, when you hear Puppet Master, you think Charm, which makes you think Enchanter.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, throw out a few names there, guys, if you've got any ideas on the side. So manipulation and misdirection are the tools of this Direlord. Scream of Control causes the enemy to fail their checks in the fight for the Puppet. Sorry, let me start again. Causes enemies that fail their check to fight for the Puppet Master for that 30 seconds. So basically a marionette on a string. Scream of Agony causes enemies in front of the Puppet Master to take damage per second based on the agony their bodies are experiencing. This can last up to 30 seconds. Scream of Confusion causes the enemy in a cone to start attacking their friends, lasts for 30 seconds. You have something called Whispers of Death. Whispers fill the mind of the enemy, causing panic and fear in their hearts. It reduces the damage done by the enemy to us.
Yeah.
And then the final one is Scream of Control, causes the enemy casters to heal the group, if possible, or cast spells on their own friends. So you can cause the enemy healers to actually maybe start healing you within your group.
It's like it swaps that hostile ally kind of flag on them. Be like, oh, these guys aren't hostile. I'll save them. Wait a minute, what in the world am I doing?
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a few things that, you know, like Lex mentioned as well, that kind of definitely scream, you know, Enchanter. But switching out a few names.
There's nothing wrong with trying something different.
Exactly, there's nothing wrong with that. And like we said, you know, some of these classes
Banshee
can meddle into the arts of the different classes or the different archetypes. Like, you know, our first discussion with the wizard, I even talked about a wizard that heals or has the utility of a healer. Why not? That's what white magic is about. And so, you know, the same goes with this. But changing a few names, instead of like maybe Scream of Control, you can call that Scream of Fear or something like that. Because control and confusion and stuff like that kind of link towards where I see the Enchanter coming in. But it's just changing that one word and you've got it.
To something else.
Exactly.
I mean, in what game have we ever seen a plate-wearing guy that looks mean as all get out, but he's actually like an enchanter? Or like an enchanter. I mean, and I got to reiterate, we're not saying that this is the kind of stuff we want to see in Pantheon. It's just a what-if, theory craft. Yeah. Maybe give them some ideas to mix things up just a little bit.
I can even see how the puppet master's animations look for these screams. You can see like you know, like a grey shadow thing coming out and just, you know, slightly moving forward. Basically, I can see how that would look. And from what we've seen so far in the latest streams with Ko and Jim Lee, how the animations and particle effects and everything are looking, wow. You know, if anybody could pull it off, it would be these guys.
So true. All right, the final one is the Crypt Keeper. Right, so the Crypt Keeper basically, everything is based around crypts and anything like that. So the first ability would be Death Bloom. Seeds are thrown down, which cause black roses to rise up and around the enemies and grip them. With there's thorns on them, it cause the enemy to bleed over time and holds the enemy in place. At higher levels, the roses emit a cloud of decay, which sicken the mob. Crypt dust is blown into the enemies, causing decay and rot to occur. Strength decrease and constitution decrease. Third spell could be Carrion, which summons birds to pick and attack the enemy. It causes blindness in the enemy, and it can last for 30 minutes. The birds, at least, before they have to be resummoned. Then you have got something called Crypt Moss. Can be cast on the floor to enhance any ground spell the Crypt Keeper or any other casters in the group may have, and that can cause the enemy to slow the movement rate due to the slipperiness of the moss. So that one specifically this is what would be great for VR if they split the spells up into like an air type spells, ground spells, fire and whatever. And this one specifically strengthens ground type spells.
I just got to say, you know, listening to all this, take all of that. That's your Direlord. That's how I want my Direlord to be. God damn. You know, those kind of options. Hell yeah. Bring it on.
The Crypt Keeper really brings like the necromantic feeling of it. I love the idea, but I'm not sure how intertwined the Necro and the Direlords will be. Like, for example, in EverQuest 1, the Shadow Knight, the granddaddy of the Direlord, was, if you're level 20 if you're level 20 Shadow Knight, you were a level 10 warrior and a level 10 Necro. That's how it worked. Very few spells were not available to you that were not available to a level 10 Necro.
Yeah.
And this really feels like it brings that forward. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I would love to
100%.
see. I would love to see them kind of get away from that. While yes, a Shadow Knight, Dread Knight, Direlord, whatever you want to call it, is seen tank necromancer. It's how I see what's happened to the Paladin. Once working for the cleric, once working for for the righteousness of the church and everything, he now doesn't have that anymore. He was from that, and that's how I kind of see the Direlord. He was once maybe a necromancer. He's kept that look and tear, that look and feel of the necro. He's still got that sliminess of a necromancer on him, but he's still completely different. He's his own thing, and
he's his own power in the world of Terminus.
Exactly, that's what I would love to see happen.
Anybody else.
So there's nothing.
2 more spells, yeah. 2 more spells.
Go on then.
All right.
So one is Summon Lich. So he summons a powerful undead to cast destructive spells at the enemy. Very similar to EQ2 with the skeletal figure running next to him. And the last one is a Deadly Fog, which I don't know if you picture it, but you see bits of lightning in the cloud illuminating skeletal figures within as it floats towards the mobs. And it then chokes the enemies and blinds them, and with hands reaching out, and the cloud can hold them, basically. So that's it.
And this is what we were talking about, though. This is where we said, there's nothing wrong with these subclasses crossing over into other fields of these classes. There's nothing wrong, as long as it doesn't take away or become too common towards the other class. So, for instance, the wizard, and the healing, for instance, as long as it's something that is a chosen path, maybe that you can take, you can choose to do that and become a wizard that heals, or a Direlord that's a crypt keeper and has these abilities to kind of dabble into the necromancer's area, and keep them still separate. That's the biggest goal, that the hardest thing that they would have as developers is to keep them separate from each other, while they're still kind of intertwining and meddling and mixing up a bit. Because there's nothing wrong with that. Because if we look at D&D, again, this comes down to D&D and fantasy. I am pretty sure, there would be subclasses to the Direlord, to the wizards. It doesn't matter what class it is, where they might meddle in the tanks or the mages or the scouts or the healers to some point. But that's where I see subclassing and nothing else, for instance. It shouldn't be something, where you take your Archetype class and he can meddle here, meddle there, meddle there. That's something where I see the specialization or the subclassing coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff.
Yeah, that's it. That's it from me.
No, there's a lot of great ideas. You can distinctly see the relationship between all of them, but you can see how they would play completely different.
Yeah.
Which is what subclassing or specializations really should do. You should see the relationship between each of them in respect to what they were when they first started, but they should provide you with an alternative way to play your character. Because while I enjoy a Direlord tank, I'm sure there's someone out there that would like to look like a Direlord with a big two-hander wanting to slice people in half.
So I want to quickly answer a question in chat, because I'm asking about what level are we proposing on opening a subclass. Now, here's where we see it different as well. We're fed up with that tradition of you start off as a Direlord, you reach level 20, you choose a subclass. For us, how we would do this, again, this comes to the point where you can either choose to stay your archetype, so your true Direlord, or you could basically choose to become one of the subclasses, and you could do that at any point in time, technically. And again, maybe some of these classes have to choose a subclass. They don't have a choice in the matter to stay as a Direlord, for instance. Maybe the Direlord has to go down one of these paths. That's where you could kind of limit it. But if you have the luxury of basically saying, hey, whatever, we see this working, you could go all the way to max level, and along your path, you'll meet different NPCs or encounter certain zones, areas where you might find something that teaches you about some of these subclasses. So you kind of get to learn as you go, and you can choose at level 50 to say, hey, guess what? I now want to go and subclass as the Puppet Master, or you could do that at level 20 or level 30 or never. You know, that's how we kind of picture that kind of thing working. And the most important thing is, though, the choices you make should matter. That's where we're being fair. You know, we're being fair by giving you that room to choose where you would basically subclass. But the penalties for that is basically, once you've made that choice, if you want to go and change your mind, it's going to be very costly. It might have a bigger time sink in it. But again, you know, that's how we kind of picture it working, if it were to be done like that.
Yeah, I agree. Ultimately, it must be fun, and what Dave says is quite correct. That it should enhance it, basically.
Yeah, like
yeah. So Nesseros says it. Sorry, where you enhance the abilities rather than narrowing the scope.
Well, it's like, for me, I've never really been a fan of the idea of subclassing as it's traditionally thought of. I prefer evolution. Yeah. You know, where my play style does change as I evolve in a game, personally. I mean, I do play other classes, believe it or not. If I'm a rogue, sometimes I don't want to be all sneaky. Sometimes I just want to try and cut off their head from behind or something. You know, I don't want to be bothered with all this. Stay out of sight.
The thing that's really bugged me over the years now is the stances that they have. You know, you've got your group stance, your raid stance, your solo stance. I'm fed up with that. Why do I have to have a separate raid stance, a separate group stance, a separate solo stance? I am this class. These are my abilities. I shouldn't have to go and put points into some different tree or skill tree or this or that for a raid setup, for this, for that. And that's where, you know, we would like to see things spiced up, changed, evolutioned, brought up into, you know, 2017.
Exactly.
And we've had this for 20 years now, on and off, this kind of skill tree or advancement. I'm sure there has to be new ways to do this. Just because, you know, if I'm a tank, a warrior, a Direlord, that's not going to change how I'm going to raid or how I'm going to be in a group.
And I mean, like I said this earlier in one of the other shows about the specializations of subclass. I know that doing a lot of change, especially on a class per class or race per race basis, is a big deal. Balancing it is not easy.
No.
Even if you're trying to make a little card game, balancing isn't easy. There's no way around it. But I think even I would be fine with just very minor changes that would introduce different mechanics, different ways to play, not necessarily changing what I do.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tank and I'm gonna be a Direlord. It doesn't matter if they're very good at it or not. I'm still gonna do it because that's what I want to play.
You know, and it could be, you know, that they don't have subclasses. That they might have different types of spells in the world from different types of vendors or NPCs or that you can find. And if you find the one, you can't find the other. You can't use the other. So you might have a yin and yang. You got a left spell, a right spell. You choose, or you maybe have three.
It could be just a case of if you want to tank as a Direlord because you are a hybrid and therefore a more flexible melee character, you make sure you've got tanking gear on that obviously requires you focus on certain stats over others, but you also have abilities that complement tanking, not damage. With a limited skill set, that is a very good possibility where if I want to be a damage dealer, then I need to make sure that my gear reflects that for performance reasons. Because let's face it, you don't go run a marathon in full plate armor. And your abilities would, again, have to reflect what you want to do.
That's where you make a really good point. That's why I see, the advancement being made into the stances as well. Connect that more towards the gear. Add maybe a higher resistibility to a certain gear. So I go into this raid dungeon, open dungeon, this raid encounter. He might require a certain resistibility or a certain amount of constitution, you name it, whatever. Right. Put that in the gear. Don't make me put points into a tree so that I'm now raid equip. Do that towards the gear. That's where that makes more sense, rather than doing it the old way that we know. Because to be honest with you, the way I feel at the moment, why MMOs are still doing this, or why developers are doing this in MMOs, is because they have no idea how to change it, or they're not willing to take the risks or willing to take the time to actually think about how can we actually evolutionize this genre? How can we evolutionize this system of play?
Exactly.
It's kind of, it feels like, this concept's worked for 20 years, let's carry on with it. Try something
lazy,
new.
Though. It's lazy.
It's that old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But the thing is, it is broke. They just don't realize it. It's broke because it's boring now.
And the thing is, the good thing about VR, and I'll say this again, is that they're right at the beginning. They're at pre-alpha stage. This is the time for them to build a robust new system in the back that can take it forward. And over 50, 70, 100 levels, or whatever the case may be.
And they've already shown that they're willing to take risks and change things up, spice things up. If we look at their halflings, what they envision, when everybody talks about halflings, it's like, oh, the Hobbit. They've gone and looked at Peter Pan, Captain Hook, Rufio's Rough Boys. That's where they took the higher, their main inspiration. The same with some of the races. How they've changed them up, Darkmere, the Scar, Space Gnomes, stuff like that. They've taken risks, and it's the same with the classes as well. The classes, some of these classes are very familiar still, but they've added those little twists in there, and that's what it takes. That's what it takes. It takes guts to do that, and I applaud them. And they've got the perfect engine as well to meddle and mess around with without breaking their core game. And the smartest move they've made, they're PvE focused. That's their prime focus, is
they're
PvE.
Not splitting.
But they're going to accommodate PvP. Some point in time they'll have PvP servers and everything, but they're going to go and have their separate PvP character balance sheet and their PvE. So when they go and change something on the PvE, it's not going to mess around with the PvP, and vice versa. So that gives them the opportunity, the chance to try some new stuff out.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I am running out of time because it is a special day today. So
we've reached the end. It's just So everybody in chat, sing happy birthday.
Hell.
Hey, you said it. Anyway,
I said special day. That could have been Easter Friday. Whatever the hell is going on, I don't celebrate it.
Happy birthday, Lexi.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to you.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday,
Ouch.
Alexa. Happy birthday to you.
Oh, Yarn, I love you, but keep your day job.
Hey, I can sing, alright? I've actually got my own single, so... Anyway.
Yeah, we won't go into that.
He's got his own single listener.
Anyway,
And
guys.
it's him when he's locked in the bathroom.
Do you have any questions, Shy, before we wrap it up? Or any thoughts, ideas, anything?
Nope, other than you guys came up with some wonderful ideas. My own thing, I just really don't want to see the same old, exactly. Shadow Knight, same thing, same deal, in different world. Yeah. I want something fresh, I want something new, and I want something awesome.
Yep.
It's not much to ask. It's not much to ask.
I'm an old school Shadow Knight player. I love my Necros. I even love my Warriors. But for the love of God, I gotta be different. I need to be unique. I need to feel
unique.
The description of the Direlord, I need to feel that in my character.
It's been missing for a long time, so I'm hoping they bring it back.
So, Josh?
Yep.
Anything you want to say?
For me, it must be fun. I think that there's plenty of ways they can go with it to make it unique from many other Direlords in the past. So, yeah. If I can come up with those ideas, I can come up with plenty.
Yeah. And again, these are just some of the ideas that we've, come up for this particular show. We might have a later show on a Direlord once we know maybe more information. Once we, they update the classes and all this stuff and everything. Then we might have a further show on this. I'm sure we will most likely dabble on the classes again and again and again. Next Friday we'll be talking about the monk. For everybody who's not aware or is aware, on April 5th to the 8th, VR will be at PAX East. So there's that as well. The next Tavern Talk will not be this month. We will be doing Tavern Talk in April. Just to make you guys aware, every 4 months or so until the news picks up in a more frequent fashion, we will be basically doing Tavern Talk every 3-4 months, and the next one will be in April. And yeah, thanks for joining us for today's show on the Direlord here on Twitch and Pantheon Radio. We will see you all next Friday.
Yep. Be safe, everybody. Have a good Easter.
Yep.
Yes, have a good Easter, guys. Cheers.
Again, I forgot that. I completely wiped my mind. Happy Easter, everybody.
Enjoy your holidays.